Hey, it's Drybear. And in the 11th hour just before release, after all these years working on the game, Larian has made a critical change to Baldur's Gate 3. And the community is split on whether or not they like it or not. So today I'd like to share my opinion on the situation and like to hear from you on what your opinion is as well. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, the next time you get pizza, the slice that you pick up first is going to have one of those giant big pizza boils that's mostly just crust and no sauce. Now, yesterday I put out a video going over every single race in Baldur's Gate 3, talking about their pros and their cons and their lore and all of that. But there was one major flaw with that video, one piece of information that I was missing, and that was that Larian very recently announced that they are going to be removing, and they've already done it in the closer to release versions like the .9s and stuff like that, removing racial statistics. Now, if you're a tabletop fan or a D&D fan or a fan of CRPGs in the past, you know that typically these games have a strong focus on immersion and being involved in the world. And so because of that, they've always had very restrictive limitations around how you play your character so that it fits into the roleplay experience. And one of the major aspects for this was making sure that races stood apart from each other based on their innate properties. Now in 5e, there are more restrictions around the ability scores and how you actually set out your abilities points and things like that based on your race. And when they first started working on Baldur's Gate 3, they did away with this and allowed you to allocate your points however you wanted, but they did keep something that was very crucial or very core to the race experience, and that is the statistics that you got from being a specific race. Gnomes are known to be cunning and smart, and they like to tinker, and they're fans of science, and so they always got a +2 to intelligence. And this is actually pretty substantial because when you go to these point values, +2 can be massive in getting you to pass checks, giving you bonuses in those, and having you play a specific class or a specific play style. However, for these races in the newest version for the 1.0 that we've seen, it appears that every single race has been homogenized when it comes to distribution of stats. And what this means is Larian has decided to give you the opportunity to customize the properties of your race. You'll still have proficiencies and abilities and cantrips and things like that that go along with your race, but the stats themselves that specify what classes you'll be good at and what classes that you'll be bad at based on the race that you choose is going away, which has a lot of pros and cons, and we'll get into that as we go through the video. But I think the biggest pro for anyone who's just a casual player of CRPGs or RPGs in general, it means that you can pick whatever race you want and you can play whatever class that you want effectively, because they now allow you to allocate your racial stat bonuses freely. You can choose to put +2 as a higher cap in your ability scores for a specific stat, and you can choose to do +1 in another stat as well, which means that previously you would have to be a strong race to play a strength-based class up to its fullest. You'd have to play an intelligent race to play an intelligence-based class to its fullest, so on and so forth. Now that doesn't really seem to exist. So if you want to play a half-orc that's highly intelligent and is a wizard, you can do that by allocating your points at character creation to create that for yourself. If you want to play a gnome berserker barbarian that is as strong or stronger than a half-orc 3 to 4 times its size, you can do that just by allocating your points at character creation. And I think that this first point here is probably the most important, and honestly is the reason why I lean toward this being a really good change. Because I think ultimately, especially if you're playing solo and you're just playing the game to enjoy it, I think having the upfront knowledge of knowing what race is good with what class and having the, losing out on a lot of opportunities or weakening yourself because you may like the look of one race, but it doesn't work as well with the class you want to play. All of those restrictions being lifted completely and allowing you to mix and match whatever you want, I think is probably better for the end player experience. But I'm curious what you think, so comment down below. But to keep this conversation balanced, let's talk about the negatives. Let's talk about the impact of this kind of change in a CRPG like Baldur's Gate 3. First of all, not all races were granted exactly +2 and +1 before. So some race examples, you would get +2 to strength, and then maybe you could pick a sub race that would have +1 to constitution. So they're kind of mimicking that average behavior for the racial bonuses that you had before and allowing you to allocate those bonuses however you want so you can create the playstyle that you're looking for. But not all races had +2, +1. For example, humans had +1 to all 5 stats. So they're going from getting +5 to all their stats to getting a +3 total, which means the total gain, the net gain that humans will have for their overall stat gain for being a human, since it's now being homogenized across the board, is going to be less than it was before. Same thing goes for the shield dwarves and gold dwarves. Shield dwarves used to have a +2, +2, and now they're going to have a +2, +1. So dwarves are worse than they were before because they were above the fold in some of those aspects. Now, granted, they couldn't choose exactly where those points went. It was part of their innate properties as a dwarf, but they are now getting, they can still recreate that, but it's just going to be less than it was before. And same thing goes for the race you see on screen, half-elf. One of the main attractive points of half-elf previously was that they were so flexible. They had more points to allocate in different places, and they could play more classes effectively than most races because they were kind of that middle ground, and it was one of their key features. And many people argue, especially if they're traditional like tabletop fans or D&D fans, they argue that the decision to make a race a specific way, because there are less downsides and less restrictions, those decisions matter less because you don't really have as much impact on that. If you decide to play a race class combination that's not ideal, like a gnome barbarian, then you wouldn't have to work as hard to reach the same strength levels that a naturally strong race would, and that kind of takes away from the immersion of playing the game, which I totally get. It actually does make a very big impact on the world, because with less restrictions, with less things going on, with less that kind of puts you on that border of the sandbox, sometimes you can just get a little bit too wily and too much out of control, and it takes you out of the world because then the rules and the boundaries are too ill-defined, and it makes it feel like you're not part of an existing system. And it does create some interesting balance questions on whether or not this is going to be too imbalanced, right? The racial stats were also a point of balance for a lot of the races before, and so like if you wanted to be a half-orc barbarian, you would get benefits for that, and there was a limit, there was a fixed limit on how many points you could put into that based on your race. But if you can now decide to put all of that in one place or put it in the right places, maybe you could be even stronger than you were before. Maybe the same goes for Dragonborn. Maybe now elves are a little bit too much when it comes to the stats that they had. So certainly does raise a lot of questions around that point. But what do you guys think? I actually am on the side of it being generally positive for the game. I think people should be able to pick whatever, you know, if they like the look of something and they want to play that way, and they like the class a specific way, I think allowing them to make that choice, especially in a role-playing game where the experience is king and you want to have that option, I think it's probably better for that. But I think there probably should be options available for people that want the legacy system or want more restricted boundaries, or maybe even you have a difficulty level that that forces that. Maybe there's a you know, like in Call of Duty, you can play the realistic mode, which has no HUD and everyone dies in one shot, and that has that its own experience and raises the immersion level. Or you can play on different difficulties that don't have that kind of gamify the experience that you're having. So I think there's definitely pros and cons there, but I would say overall, I think it's probably better for people, and especially since it seems like Larian wants to get people that don't normally play these kind of games into the world of Baldur's Gate 3, and this is a great way to do it, because not only can you play whatever you want, class and race combination, but it also means you don't have that barrier of knowledge that you have to know what the stats are, how they work, and you have to know what races are good with what classes when you make it. Otherwise, you'll just end up being weaker than you would be otherwise. And so the less upfront knowledge you need to play the game effectively, I think makes it a lot more accessible for people that are just coming into the genre. So I just wanted to update you guys on that. Everything in the race video I posted yesterday is accurate except for this one change. That means that we will be able to distribute our stats as we want. play whatever race we want. Now, you'll still need to pick out your proficiencies and your bonuses and cantrips and things like that. There will still be natural properties to the races, but you will be able to play essentially whatever class you want effectively with whatever race you want outside of those individual bonuses. If you found value in the video, leave a like down below, leave a comment for the algorithm to help this video get seen by more people, and I'll see you on my live stream. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content, link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.